Sarah Collins had always been known as the warm-hearted woman with a smile that could light up a room. At 27, she was excited about becoming a mother for the first time. Her pregnancy, though challenging at times, had been a journey filled with hope and anticipation. She'd spent months preparing her home for the arrival of her baby girl, painting the nursery in soft pastel colors and collecting all the baby clothes and toys she could find. Sarah couldn't wait to meet the little life growing inside her, and she found comfort in the idea of becoming a mother. Her best friend, Lucy Miller, had been a constant in her life. The two had grown up together, inseparable through their school. Years and into adulthood, they shared everything, dreams, fears, and moments of happiness. Lucy had always been there for Sarah, from late-night talks to comforting her after heartbreaks. Sarah trusted Lucy like she trusted no one else. When Sarah found out she was pregnant, Lucy was the first person she confided in. Lucy was overjoyed at the news and had immediately offered to help in any way she could. Throughout the pregnancy, Lucy was a constant presence by Sarah's side. She would often accompany her to doctor appointments, help Sarah with grocery shopping, and spend hours organizing the baby's things. Sarah appreciated the support and reassurance Lucy offered. In the midst of the changes in her life, Sarah knew she could always count on her best friend to be there, calming her anxieties and sharing in her excitement. But as Sarah's due date grew closer, she began to notice something strange. Lucy's attentiveness, once comforting, started to feel a little too intense. Lucy began asking increasingly personal questions about the baby, probing into Sarah's thoughts about the delivery, the baby's future, and even her plans for the child's upbringing. At first, Sarah chalked it up to Lucy's excitement and genuine interest. After all, Lucy had no children of her own, and Sarah figured that might explain her curiosity. However, the questions began to cross a line. Sarah noticed that Lucy seemed particularly fixated on the baby's gender and the idea of Sarah's motherhood. Lucy started expressing an odd sense of envy, commenting on how lucky Sarah was to be having a child, how fortunate she was to experience the joys of pregnancy. She even mentioned in passing how much she longed for a child of her own. Sarah, oblivious to the deeper meaning behind these comments, reassured her friend that one day Lucy would find the happiness she was looking for too. It wasn't just the conversations that began to make Sarah uneasy. Lucy's behavior subtly shifted. She began to show up unannounced, often staying longer than Sarah had expected. She'd hover around the house, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging and offering advice that felt more like commands. Sarah could feel herself growing more uncomfortable, but she dismissed it, attributing it to stress from the upcoming birth. As the days passed, Lucy's behavior only intensified. She would often show up at odd hours, her face pale and tense, as though she were hiding something. There were moments when Sarah caught Lucy staring at her swollen belly, her eyes glistening, with an emotion Sarah couldn't quite place. It wasn't jealousy, at least Sarah didn't think it was, but something darker. Still, she brushed it off, convincing herself that it was just the pressures of her friend's own unspoken struggles. One evening, as Sarah was relaxing on the couch, Lucy arrived at her door again, this time carrying a large bag of baby clothes. Lucy sat beside her, her fingers tapping nervously on her lap. But it was when she spoke that Sarah truly felt something was off. Lucy told her how much she admired Sarah's life, how perfect it seemed, and how she wished she could have the same. There was something unsettling in her tone, a sharp edge that made Sarah feel a chill, but she tried to ignore it. She never imagined, in that moment, that the very person she trusted most could have dark intentions brewing beneath the surface. Lucy was hiding a secret, and Sarah couldn't yet fathom how that secret would change everything. As Sarah's due date drew closer, the unease she had begun to feel around Lucy only deepened. What had started as a slight discomfort soon blossomed into a constant, nagging feeling in the back of her mind. Lucy's obsession with the pregnancy was no longer subtle, it had become all-consuming. Her visits had grown more frequent, and she began showing up uninvited at odd times of the day, sometimes even in the middle of the night. At first, Sarah believed that Lucy was just excited and eager to be involved in every moment of her pregnancy. But soon, Sarah began to notice something more unsettling in her friend's behavior. When she arrived at the cafe, she was surprised to find that Lucy wasn't there yet. Normally, Lucy would have been waiting by the window, eagerly scanning the room for Sarah's arrival. But today, there was no sign of her. Sarah shrugged it off, figuring Lucy had simply been caught up in something. She ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by, trying to distract herself from the restlessness that had been growing inside her. Minutes stretched into an hour, and Lucy still hadn't arrived. Sarah sent a text, wondering if everything was okay. No response came, which wasn't entirely unusual. Lucy often took her time responding. But when Sarah tried to call, her phone went straight to voicemail. The nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach began to grow. She glanced at the clock. The cafe was quiet now, and there was no sign of Lucy anywhere. Sarah texted her again, asking if she was still coming, but there was still no reply. It was unlike Lucy to disappear without a word, and as the hours ticked by, Sarah's concern deepened into something else, something far more alarming. By late afternoon, Sarah had become frantic. She called Lucy's phone repeatedly, but there was no answer. When she finally returned home, her anxiety only escalated. Lucy's car was nowhere to be found, and the house was silent. Something was wrong. Sarah felt it in her bones, a gut-wrenching certainty that she couldn't ignore. She tried calling her family and even some mutual friends, but no one had heard from Lucy. It was then that Sarah's mind began to race. Lucy had been acting increasingly strange in the past few weeks. Was it possible that something had happened? Was she in trouble, or worse? Had she done something to herself? The thought made Sarah's heart race. But there was something else. Something even more terrifying. What if Lucy had planned something? Suddenly the phone rang. It was Detective Miller, a friend of Sarah's family who had known her for years. His voice, normally calm and reassuring, now held an edge of urgency. He explained that there had been a report of a possible crime on the outskirts of town, and a trail of blood had been discovered leading to an abandoned house. The discovery was disturbing, but what chilled Sarah to the core was the fact that the blood had been traced back to her. Her hands trembled as the words sank in. Lucy had been involved somehow. Sarah's mind raced. What had Lucy done? The police had already begun investigating, but there were no leads, no clear answers. They had no idea where Lucy was. Desperation hung in the air. Sarah felt helpless, trapped in the vortex of her own fear and confusion. Every instinct told her that something terrible had happened, but she couldn't yet grasp the full extent of the horror unfolding. Later that evening, a call came in from the police, and Sarah's worst fears were realized. They had found her. Lucy's car had been abandoned just a few miles from the abandoned house, and a search of the property revealed the unthinkable. Sarah was told to come immediately to identify her friend. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rushed to the scene, knowing, with a sickening certainty, that her life, and the life of her unborn child, had been irrevocably changed. The scene that greeted her when she arrived was indescribable. The air was heavy with the stench of decay, and the abandoned house seemed to have a sinister presence. Inside, Sarah's worst nightmare was unfolding. Her mind struggled to process the horrific sight before her. Her friend, her closest companion, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. There was blood everywhere, the overwhelming evidence of the violence that had been inflicted upon her. The police had found Sarah's body, lifeless and mutilated, lying in the darkened room. Her stomach had been brutally cut open. It was a crime, so grotesque, so incomprehensible, that Sarah's brain couldn't fully understand it. In the corner of the room, a small bundle, a baby, still alive but critically injured, was found. The shock and horror of what had transpired began to seep into Sarah's mind, but the full truth was still hidden, still waiting to be uncovered. The investigation was just beginning, but Sarah's world had already been shattered. The betrayal was too much to comprehend. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Lucy, the woman she had trusted with her life, had been the one to take it. And she had done it for the most twisted of reasons. The following days were a blur of confusion, disbelief, and horror. The police worked tirelessly, but it felt as though time had slowed, stretching each moment into an eternity. The town of Meridian, once a peaceful place where everyone knew everyone's name, had become a place of unease and suspicion. Sarah's family was left reeling from the brutality of the crime, trying to process the fact that Sarah, their beloved daughter, had been murdered by someone she had once called a best friend. Lucy had vanished without a trace, leaving only a trail of blood and unanswered questions behind. The police had launched a massive manhunt, combing through every lead they could find. Sarah's family was left in the dark, unable to make sense of what had happened. The image of Lucy, once a loving friend and confidant, had been replaced by something much darker, something unrecognizable. How could a woman who had been so close to Sarah commit such an unthinkable crime? The investigation quickly revealed chilling details that painted a disturbing picture of Lucy's obsession with Sarah's pregnancy. For weeks, Lucy had been researching illegal ways to induce labor prematurely, poring over articles and online forums about cesarean sections performed outside of medical settings. The police discovered that Lucy had been preparing for the act for some time, gathering supplies and making plans without Sarah's knowledge. It became clear that this had never been an act of passion, but one of cold, calculated intent. Then, the surveillance footage came in. The cameras at a nearby gas station had captured Lucy's car leaving Sarah's neighborhood on the night of the crime. Her movements seemed deliberate, as if she were on a mission. The police began to piece together the timeline, and what they discovered was chilling. The moment Sarah had gone missing, Lucy had been the last person to see her alive. But it was not just the absence of evidence that shocked investigators. It was the overwhelming sense of premeditation that came with it. The breakthrough came when they found Lucy, not in a hiding place as they had expected, but in an abandoned cabin just outside town. When they arrived, they found her in a catatonic state, sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth. The police had to restrain her to bring her in for questioning. Lucy said nothing, her face expressionless, but her eyes were filled with a vacant emptiness that was deeply unsettling. It was as if she had lost all connection to reality, trapped in a web of her own twisted actions. When Lucy was finally able to speak, the truth came tumbling out in a series of fragmented, broken sentences. She confessed to the crime without hesitation, detailing the planning that had gone into it. Lucy spoke about her obsession with Sarah's pregnancy, about how she had wanted a child of her own for so long. But it wasn't just motherhood that she desired. It was the control, the power that came with it. She wanted to take Sarah's baby, to raise the child as her own, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. Lucy's account of the events was chilling. She described how she had carefully calculated the moment when Sarah would be most vulnerable, when she would trust her the most. She had spent weeks gaining Sarah's trust, becoming more and more involved in every aspect of her pregnancy, all the while concealing her dark intentions. The night of the crime, Lucy had lured Sarah to the house under the guise of spending time together before the baby arrived. Once inside, she had struck, using a knife to cut open Sarah's body in a brutal attempt to extract the baby. But Lucy's plan had been far from flawless. In her frenzy to take the child, she had left Sarah to die, but the baby, miraculously, survived. Though injured and bleeding, the infant was found alive, a symbol of the strength that Sarah had tried to protect until her final moments. The police were able to quickly trace the location of Lucy's abandoned car and find her in the cabin. But it was clear that Lucy wasn't the same woman who had once been Sarah's closest friend. She had become something unrecognizable, consumed by an obsession that had driven her to commit an act so horrific that it left the entire town in shock. As Lucy sat in the interrogation room, her eyes vacant and cold, the full weight of her crime settled in. The woman who had once been Sarah's confidant, her trusted friend, had become the very monster she had feared. The town of Meridian, forever changed by this brutal act, would never be the same. And as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the twisted desires of one woman had cost another her life, and left a newborn girl to grow up without the mother who had fought so hard to bring her into the world. The trial of Lucy Miller captivated the nation. For weeks, news outlets covered every detail of the case, broadcasting the chilling story of the once cherished friend who had turned into a monster. In the quiet town of Meridian, every corner seemed to echo with the horror of Sarah Collins's brutal murder. Lucy, once a figure of warmth and support in Sarah's life, was now the focus of every headline, every whispered conversation. The community, which had once been tight-knit and trusting, was now fractured, each person grappling with the unthinkable betrayal that had shattered their sense of safety. Sarah's family struggled with the aftermath. The pain of losing Sarah was unbearable, and the trauma of knowing how her life had been taken by someone she had trusted with her unborn child was a wound that would never fully heal. Sarah's parents, though devastated by the loss of their daughter, found solace in the fact that her baby had survived the horrific ordeal. The infant, though critically injured, had been given a chance at life, and that became their focus. The surviving child was placed in the loving care of Sarah's parents, who vowed to raise her with all the love and protection they could provide. As the trial began, the courtrooms were filled with people eager to witness the unraveling of a crime so incomprehensible that it defied logic. Lucy sat in her seat expressionless, her eyes hollow and devoid of any emotion. The person who had once been Sarah's confidant and closest friend now seemed like a stranger. The defense argued that Lucy had been suffering from an extreme mental breakdown, that the pressures of her life combined with her infertility and long-standing desire for a child, had driven her to commit this horrific act. But the prosecution painted a different picture. They described a woman who had meticulously planned the murder, a woman whose obsession with motherhood had become so consuming that it had led her to betray and kill her best friend. The details of the crime, though gruesome, were essential in securing the prosecution's case. They played the recordings of Lucy's confession, her cold, emotionless recounting of how she had lured Sarah to the house and cut her open in a twisted attempt to take the child. Lucy had confessed to the crime without remorse, and her behavior during the investigation had been eerily detached, almost as if she had no comprehension of the gravity of her actions. The prosecution argued that Lucy had seen Sarah's pregnancy as a possession, something to be taken, no matter the cost. They painted Lucy as a woman so consumed by envy and desire that she had dehumanized Sarah, reducing her to nothing more than a vessel for the child she so desperately wanted. As the defense team tried to paint a picture of Lucy as a woman driven to madness, the victims' families remained focused on their need for justice. Sarah's parents, in particular, were vocal in their grief, speaking at length about their daughter's life, her dreams, and how violently they had been stolen from her. They described the pain of knowing that Sarah had trusted Lucy, had allowed her into every intimate detail of her life, only to be betrayed in the most horrific way imaginable. Their voices trembled as they spoke of the hope they had for their grandchild, now left without the mother who had fought so hard to give her life. The final moments of the trial were tense, with the jury deliberating on Lucy's fate. After hours of deliberation, the decision came. Lucy Miller was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and grief, as the families of both Sarah and the surviving baby were left to reckon with the aftermath of the crime. Lucy, though sentenced to life in prison, seemed unmoved by the verdict, her face as vacant as it had been throughout the entire trial. The woman who had once been Sarah's best friend, the person she had trusted more than anyone else, was now just another name in a long list of people whose actions had torn apart a family. In the years that followed, Sarah's family focused on the future. They worked tirelessly to raise the child with love and care, making sure that she knew about her mother's strength and the fight Sarah had put up to protect her. While the pain of Sarah's loss never completely faded, the family found peace in knowing that the child would grow up surrounded by love and support. Sarah's memory lived on through her daughter, and her legacy was one of resilience, even in the face of unspeakable betrayal. As for Lucy, her life in prison was one of isolation. She had lost everything, her freedom, her reputation, and any chance of ever having the family she had so desperately wanted. She was left to confront the consequences of her actions alone, in a place where no one could ever again trust her or call her a friend.